Oh no, I have to re-edit the Facebook stream for some reason. And delete that. And then stream it there. Save changes. All right. I think we are now going on both YouTube and Facebook, and I will need to make a note of that because it also happened with our movie club. So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining me for our Q4 book club creative process. I know that it's January, but we do these on a 3-month basis. So we started this book in November. I had to do math in my head. So it's actually the last book that we did for 2023. And we always do our Q4 book club is creative process or self-help. So we read The Creative Act, A Way of Being by Rick Rubin. Before we get started on talking about the actual book, I do want to take care of a bunch of stuff that we say at the start of all of these. So this is our book club, but we do have 2 more clubs that actually happen monthly. Our book club is every 3 months, but the other 2, we do it every month. We also have a movie club, and we have a music listening club. So our movie club, we actually already had our January discussion. We had that on Friday night. And you can find that stream up on both our Facebook group as well as our YouTube. Our listening club is going to be happening tomorrow night. We listened to Drunk by Thundercat. Really interesting album, and I'm really excited to talk about that with you guys. We do keep these up online, so if you're not able to join us live, you can absolutely watch them on the replay. I think Beckett once said that she listens to them like they're a podcast.
Yep.
You can find them on our YouTube as well as in the Facebook group. If you do watch it, especially in the Facebook group, I still get notifications and I'd still love to talk to you about all of this media. If it's on YouTube, it takes me a little bit longer to remember that comments go on there. I don't get them automatically. But in our Facebook group, we do. And on the 1st of every month, we will announce our new picks in the Facebook group. So if you're not a part of that, absolutely join us there. We have a lot of different discussions happening. You can actually make suggestions to us for our media clubs. It's also how you would get onto these video panels. So we only allow like 3 or 4 people on each of them just for, ease of discussion. But they are streamed live. It's possible you're watching this live now. And when you comment on it and we are live, we actually get that on our end immediately. So you can be a part of the discussion that way. Or like I said, if you watch one of our past streams, you can just comment on there and I will also see that eventually. We also have a Patreon. So if you'd like to support our group, not just these clubs, but all the other things, we have Saturday accountability calls, and we talk a lot about problems with just being creative and all of that. We
have live in-person meetups sometimes.
And we are planning on adding a lot more into that. It's a really great group of people. And if you'd like to support what we do, you can go support us on Patreon for as little as $2 a month.
And we appreciate you.
So without further ado, I think that's all I have. We took December off from clubs as we do every year, and somehow everything that I say at the start of these is just gone. But
sounds good to me. I think you covered it all. So
Usually at the start of these, I always say spoiler warnings, but it's kind of hard to spoil a self-help creative process book, especially one that covers a lot of topics that we already discuss regularly. So if for some reason you don't want to know what's in The Creative Act by Rick Rubin before listening to this call, go ahead and read it. It's actually a very fast read. See, I'm sure I have a very nice slide to begin with. I'm guessing that you both finished the book.
Yep.
I have no idea. I bounce around. I may have finished the book. I may have read it twice. I may have read it 0.7 times. Not sure.
It's very, I don't know, it kind of is weirdly like a poetry book where you just kind of open it up and you can start at any point in time. Nothing, it's less self-help and more the musings of a man who has spent a lot of time with creative people.
Yeah, it's a lot of like just kind of things that should be common knowledge about creative process, but that you don't really think about that often. So it's helpful in that way.
It also says all of them in like a very calm way. Like reading this book was calming.
Yeah, as is the audiobook. His voice is also very calming.
Yeah, he's one of those people that talks exactly like he talks, right? He's got an excellent podcast called Broken Record that he shares with Malcolm Gladwell, the 10,000 Hour guy that's written a ton of books, and he sounds exactly like himself when he's talking to artists in the studio, as well as interviewing people about the creative process. And do you want? I don't know if you were planning on doing this, Rebecca. I can do a real quick bio of him for people who don't know him.
I would love that.
He's arguably the biggest record producer in the world, and basically the guy who was the first producer to properly record hip hop. So back in the earliest days of hip hop in New York in the early 80s, what they would do is they wouldn't let the DJ do the scratching on the vinyl and do the drum machine. They would bring humans, a soul R&B band in, and then just have that replace the drum machine and the scratching, and the DJs kind of replace the lead singer, right? And so he was the first one to say that that's not rap music. There's Rick. And so he's like not only one of the biggest hip hop producers ever, he's kind of the seminal producer. He was the first producer that really produced what hip hop really was when you went to see it live. And then he's done tons of stuff in the rock and funk eras. I mean, Johnny Cash basically gave Johnny Cash a second career. Red Hot Chili Peppers, Tom Petty, all kinds of folks, and he's still super active. He owns and operates Shangri-La Studio in Malibu, right, looking over Zuma Beach, which was originally the studio that the band built in the mid-'70s. Like Robbie Robertson, Levon Helm, the band. So anyway, that's a quick version. He's a badass.
Yeah. Usually when I describe him as a record producer, I also talk about like heavy metal and like the hard rock that he also brought to the forefront. So like on top of Red Hot Chili Peppers, he also did like Slayer and Metallica.
Yeah, did he do Danzig?
He did do Danzig.
Jeez, that just, yeah, I all that stuff I just kind of forget. You don't think of him as the Metallica guy. Let me see.
Yeah, I mean, I do.
Beastie Boys, Metallica. Well, yeah.
So it's interesting because when people ask me who I am, when I talk about Rick Rubin, I always like start with the metal because I think that's interesting. Also, I spent a lot of time with metal bands when I was in college. So I come from that side of things. But yeah, all over the place with the people he's worked with, and just very calming. He knows a lot about creatives, and he has a fantastic ear for good art.
Oh,
So
you know, and speaking of his ear, it's important to note he's not really a musician. I mean, he was in a punk band. I probably shouldn't repeat the name of his punk band, and he played guitar, but you know, like he knows 3 chords, so he's not really a musician. And he always talks about he's always approaching music as a producer, as a fan. But he also is a guy that doesn't let the fact that he doesn't consider himself a musician like stop him from telling musicians things that are probably uncomfortable for them. And one of the greatest critiques he did that I remember, like it was sort of like you're not really up to par, was he was working on Adele's follow-up to her first big album. I forget the name of it because they were first 2 albums were both her age.
I
Anyway,
think all of her albums are just the age she was when
oh, are
she
they
made
really?
them.
Okay, so
Yeah.
her second album was her first big album, and they were working on the follow-up to that. And his like very zen, very calm, you know, way of saying this isn't working is I don't believe you, right? And that could have been a comment on the lyric content. It could have been a comment on the music performance, but it's like it's very zen. It's very calm. It's not you suck. It's just I don't believe it. I don't believe you. And so then that, and I don't think he produced the album. I think that sort of ended that part of the project. But it's like he's not one of those, you know, yell at the artist, throw things against the wall and break them to get people to perform. He's super zen, and you know, what I see him doing when I see videos of him working with artists and when he's on his podcast, it is the voice in the book is him. So
Yeah. Well, he narrates the audiobook as well, and listening to that was very like meditative. Like I had to rewind several times because I was like, wait, what did he say? Because I would just find myself like zoning out.
He's really big into meditation. He's studied like transcendental meditation. He's talked about it a lot. It is very important to his being. So it doesn't surprise me at all. Yeah, it's something that I want to cultivate in myself, is just that kind of calming personality that's helping to move people forward. But yeah, he is very interestingly somebody who when I think of Rick Rubin, I don't actually think of him as like an artist. He's Rick Rubin, the producer. But everything that he says about the creative process is 100% true, and he knows everything about it and existed within it.
Yeah.
Kind of without producing his own.
And another thing I would think about him is I think he's also a good teacher. And I don't know if you would agree with that, but that there are teachers who are great, but they tell you something and you're just more confused than before they told it to you. And with him, he has this real knack for simplifying things to the essence. And he tells you something, you go, oh, okay, I know what needs to be done. Whether or not you can do it in that moment is a different issue. But you know, he's just very simple, and you know, everybody can understand what he's trying to get at.
Yeah,
Even if what he's trying to get at is these songs aren't your best and you need to write new ones.
Yeah. I also like the way the book feels.
It's cloth.
Yeah.
It doesn't come with a dust jacket. So what you see there is actually the gray cloth.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's actually cloth. I looked at the edges of it. It's not even like book cloth at all.
Oh.
Which is something that I say because I make books. It's like more of like a linen.
Really?
Yeah.
It looks like linen.
Yeah.
It looks like linen.
So I don't know. It's very satisfying to feel it. It stands out on like my bookshelf. Yeah, this book has a lot of things that we already talked about. Like we talk about these every week, about like the creative process and looking inside. He is very much somebody who believes that, you know, art dictates itself almost. Like you are just like a conduit for the art as it comes. and it's kind of your job as the artist to arrange the thoughts more so than make up the thoughts. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
don't oppose your will,
Mm-hmm.
right? Just like let it be what came to you, and don't say, well, I'm Glenn Danzig and therefore this has to be screaming, screeching metal. It may not be. Yeah, I mean, he had Johnny Cash cover, what was his big song? It was 9 Inch Nails.
Yeah.
You imagine telling Johnny Cash, you know what you really need to do is do some, like, a song by this artist. He's like, what?
Yeah, I loved reading about how like his whole approach to music and art in general is that the artist is a vessel to bring forth the idea. It's less about like you as a creative person and more about being a conduit to what the universe is trying to say through you. So,
Yeah.
I have the opinion that anyone can be an artist, and you know, that may be a little bit of a controversial statement in some artistic circles, but I don't care.
Well, he would agree with you. His first chapter is everyone is a creator.
I know, and I loved that one. I was like, oh, he and I are on the same wavelength. I love it.
Yeah, I usually say I believe anybody can be a creative. That's how I usually phrase it, because I think there's a difference between being creative and being artistic. Artistic is something very, very specific. But like I'm always shocked because I feel like I've lived in this little creative bubble my entire life. And now as an adult, occasionally I meet people outside of that bubble and they are astounded by what I do. And it's just weird to me because in my head, I can't comprehend people not doing that. But then I talk to my doctor and they're like, oh, wow, that's so cool. I wish I was creative. But they can be. And they absolutely are, because being creative is more about bringing ideas together. And that's a lot of that first chapter is specifically being creative and not being an artist, which isn't to say that anybody can be an artist. I think it's just very important to make that differentiation.
Yeah, I mean, yes and no. Art is what we perceive it to be. I don't believe that it's anything outside of us. I think it's, we give definition and meaning to the things that we observe as humans. So it can be anything. And, just walk around a modern art museum and you'll see truly anyone can be an artist.
Was it in this or was it in something else I was reading recently? Talking about turning just regular things into art is something that's very specific.
Miguel, were you with us at the Hammer Museum? Were you on that trip?
I think so. That's the one in I don't know if it's Beverly Hills or downtown.
It's in Westwood.
Oh, okay. Is that by Beverly Hills or no?
Sort of. It's by UCLA.
I remember you being at Starbucks because we were talking about Tonto, but I didn't make it to the trip because I was in the middle of working.
Yeah. But that one, like, there were several exhibits at that specific showing that, the collections that they had on display on that trip that, were very impressive and very well thought out and artistic, and the ingenuity that went into them and things like that. And then there were some that I was like, okay, somebody gave you money to produce that. Interesting.
Yeah, it meant something to somebody, or it was money laundering.
And then had the idea to put it in a museum. Okay. So that, stuff like that is when I'm, this really is accessible to anyone as long as you know the right people.
But
that's a very dark way of looking at it.
But I think with Rebecca's way of looking at creativity versus art, because one of the most creative people I know of is Marcus Buckingham, and he conducts polls for Gallup. what he's done with that is stunningly creative. And he started this whole movement of how, you know, businesses should interact with their coworkers and employees and stuff. And it's super creative. He probably wouldn't call himself an artist because he's a pollster, and he's such an advanced pollster. He's taken surveys of things that people don't think you can take surveys of, you know, like people's state of mind and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Super creative. But if you call him an artist, he would go, I do polls for Gallup, right? Does he do it in an amazing creative fashion? Absolutely. Right. You can be creative in any field. Artists just tends to be people who live making art.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The way I do Excel spreadsheets for like large groups of people is like, I could say that that's a work of art, but I'm not going to put them into a gallery. Like, so
Well,
I
it's a
don't think the
creative
Excel
act.
Never say
but-
never.
No, it's a creative act. It was like a
But it's a
really
creative act,
use
yeah.
of a kind of thing that most people wouldn't think is creative. It's accounting software, right?
Mhm.
Right. And then that's the only place I can think of where creative is really negative, like creative accounting, right? But you can be a really creative
sounds like
accountant without breaking the law. Very, very important.
Yeah, creative accounting feels like you're getting around the law. Like,
Yeah.
But you can still be really creative without breaking the law in accountancy,
Yes.
right? It doesn't require that you break the law.
uh,
It just has a very negative connotation.
yeah, I think it's specifically, if I go back to this slide, everyone is a creator. To be a creative is to create. You can do that in any capacity. And you can do that in almost any way that is meaningful to you. It's not a very specific thing. It's kind of allowing yourself to allow yourself to do things. And the way that he always describes it is that way of, you know, you are a vessel for your art and it will come to you. I think it's all kind of the same thing, whether he even says it's at some point in this that you can call it spirituality, you can call it like religion. It's all kind of the same thing.
Yeah. Well, you know, speaking of spirituality, I'm not a follower of religion, but, you know, I can dive into, I mean, I can look, the table of contents, you know, it's just 2 facing pages, right? If I'm ever feeling anxiety ridden or bummed or whatever, I can find something on here that relates to my state of mind and read it and sort of have a better understanding of what I'm doing, and also be lifted out of the anxiety, lifted out of the negative emotion and stuff. And I think that's kind of amazing for a book that you could look at on the, you know, the cover. Oh, this is just for artists kind of thing. So I don't know if anybody else uses it like that, but it's just that being an artist, if things are freaking me out, it usually relates to that stuff, right? And then I find a chapter, there's like, I don't know how many. There's probably 100 chapters. The chapters are very small. And, you know, there's bound to be something in there that's related to what I'm going through. And I read about it and I feel better. You know, it's like talking to a Zen master or a psychotherapist, like a, you know, a village elder 200 years ago, right?
Mhm.
Anyway, that's one of the things I use it for. Uh-oh, look at this.
Yeah, so I found these.
PowerPoint is a creative act.
I found these on both his website, and then the little quotes are from the Kindle page, because Kindle lets you highlight things on it, and then they keep track of that, and then they show what are the most popular things, what are the most highlighted statements by readers. The black and gray one at the top is actually the very first page of the book.
Yeah.
And I think it's very important because I've talked about it a lot, about how, you know, there's a lot of self-help books out there and a lot of things that are like, here is the process and here is how to do things. Like even the last one we read, Atomic Habits, is a fantastic book, but it doesn't specifically state in it to take bits and pieces of it. And so if you're just reading it from start to finish, it makes you feel like that's an entire process in and of itself.
Yeah.
And
It's just anti that.
yeah, this states at the beginning, and I really like that it states at the beginning that these are just his ideas, and take and choose, like you can pick and choose, like figure out which ones work for you. Yeah, each of them you can choose to explore it further, but if you don't want to, that's completely fine.
Yeah. So, like, I can give an example from this, although I'm taking it sliding out of his context. If you look at the Gray quote, last two lines, use what's helpful, let go of the rest. One of the things I had a lot of anxiety about when I started writing the book, or once I got into the book, is I was basing the content of my book on writing a book about Ringo Starr, and I based it on a previously published book by Paul McCartney, partly because it was published by Hal Leonard, who owned the Beatles. What's the rights to publish Beatles stuff? There's a certain kind of rights. Anyway, and then I had all these ideas that took it kind of way out of that. And just hearing the words, use what's helpful, let go of the rest, is sort of like, I'm combining this with other thoughts from the book, but it's sort of, use what's helpful, let go of the rest. And so that, to me, speaks to let go of the Paul McCartney book, process, organization, scheme, and use what's helpful from that and incorporate all these new ideas that have come since then, right? And like, if I'm freaking out about, this is no longer the book I was writing, something like that can calm me down.
Yeah. And that is something that happens often during the creative process, is that we get, I think we just talked about this yesterday on the Dragonfly call, where we get really, or maybe it was the previous week, I don't remember, about like, we get really glued to one idea of what a work is supposed to be. And then sometimes it's difficult to let go of that and let it unfold as it, as it changes and grows. We get really like attached to certain aspects of it that are hard to let go sometimes. And sometimes that's the most important part, is, letting go of what's not useful to the work, what's not serving the work.
Yes.
But I also like, he has an entire part of this that is, don't let go of it entirely. Make a note that it was there. Like, remember where it was. Because you can always go back to that. Yeah. Set it aside.
Don't set it on fire, set it aside.
Put it into its own separate folder, because you might use like an idea from that later on.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another brilliant thought. And I don't know if it comes from Rick's book, but like, one of the things I love about writing the book on the computer is that if I have these two really chapters that I'm just completely in love with. This happened when I was preparing samples for two publishers. I had these two paragraphs in one chapter. I thought, oh my God, this is the best research I've done. I'm thrilled with this. And I had some buddy of mine who's also a drummer copy edit it. And he's just going, what the heck? Why is that in there? And I'm like, this is the best part. He's going, I would examine that. Right. And so the beautiful thing is, like, it was just set aside. Okay, I'm putting it in a safe place. It's no longer in the chapter. I'm sending it to the publisher. But I never felt like I had to like discard it. It's just sort of like, it's no longer in that chapter. And that's enough to like move forward. It's just like, it'll live somewhere else. I'm going to have, what was that Brian Eno book? It was a Year with Swollen Appendices, where it was like the book was a third of the size of the book and 2/3 of the book was the appendices. And that was the most important part of the book. It was, we're just going to have this massive appendix with Miguel's geeky little, look what I figured out about this Beatles song. That probably nobody cares about.
Yeah. Reading this book got me really thinking about how I'm going to revise my novel. Because I've been putting that off for so long, because it scares me, because I don't want to let go of the way that I wrote it, because the way that I wrote it was the way that I wanted it. But if it's not serving the overall work, it needs to go, and I need to revise and think of a different way to express what the book is trying to say. So yeah, I got really distracted reading this book because I would constantly just be thinking about how I'm going to change mine.
And that's the beauty of it. It's okay to get distracted in the middle of this book. It's sort of like, oh my God, I need to go do this. Close the book off to do the whatever is necessary. And I think this is book. It's like a reference, right? It's like always on the shelf. You're probably never going to read it. I'm probably never going to read it cover to cover, but I'm going to refer to it all the time when I'm stuck, which happens a lot.
Absolutely. I think there's another really a line that I really like in here, and I really want to give this book to somebody else. So I pulled out a lot of the tabs that I initially put in. Oh, but look, I opened the page to it.
Ooh, karma.
City.
The person who makes something today isn't the same person who returns to the work tomorrow. So you might make something and it is exactly what you want, but then you revisit it and it's not quite hitting the same way.
Yeah.
And there's also a huge part of this book that's just like, it's not going to hit the people who read it the same way either, which is something that I strongly believe about art. I do a lot of feedback on like screenplays and things like that. And I'm always surprised when I give feedback and they're like, great, I am going to make that change. And it's like, you're not supposed to. You're going to take my feedback and then ask yourself, is this...
Use what's helpful, let go of the rest.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So like maybe I make a suggestion and the person says, oh, I didn't even realize that I did that. This was like, I didn't think about this. And then they can go and revise that. But I've also had it being like, I do not like this character. There's, this is a little bit of an aside. Somebody that I know wrote a book, and I read the book in an earlier part of it. And it's a romance novel, and I really, really disliked the love interest in it. And so she was like, what did you think of the book? And I was like, well, writing wise, it's fine. But like, I couldn't get past the feeling that like the love interest is incredibly mean multiple times in my opinion. Like, I didn't like the love interest. And like, that was my honest opinion of it. So it kind of like, I don't know, if somebody gave me that opinion, I'd be like, all right, you didn't like this person. And then you can decide whether or not they actually read that way. But I am in the acknowledgement section, or they just go, thank you for your notes on reading this. I didn't know that you didn't like him that much. And then they changed no part of the character, but I still love that I'm in the acknowledgements of just like, I'm sorry that you hated this.
Wow. And that works both ways for the creative process, meaning, you know, something that you might have loved one day, come back to the next day, it stinks. It's sort of also true that there's something that you do and you just go, this stinks. And then you come back to it and go, oh, wait, this really doesn't stink. And this might be the best thing for this section of the book, or this gave me a whole new idea about where to pursue. So I think we're real poor judges of the content until we get some distance on it.
Oh, absolutely. You kind of have to forget all of the work that you put into it.
Yeah.
Or maybe forget the idea that you have in your head about what it should be. And then revisit it when you're able to see it as it is and see if it does need movement forward.
Well, like he says in the book, the editing process is not about here, take all these notes and make all these changes. It's about taking the notes and then, you know, changing the things that serve the work and make it better, and then re-listening to it from a new like from fresh ears or fresh eyes or something, and like seeing if the overall work was made better, or if further changes need to be made, or if some of the things that were changed need to go back. Like it's not, you know, note after note after note after note, and then just change every bullet as you see it. And then, was this addressed? Was that addressed? In the reassessment process, it's more about coming at it fresh and seeing if it actually bettered the work or not. So,
Yeah.
Yeah. Even when you're working with something that seems really binary, like a copy editor, right? It's like they're copy editing everything they say. At least before I first worked with a copy editor, I thought everything they're going to say, I have to go for or fight against and whatever. And a lot of it was just presented to me as like, if you're trying to convey this, you might consider this, right? Take it with a grain of salt. It might be different if I have a publisher and it's a publisher's copy editor that's telling me what to do. But still, even something that just seems like it's black and white, this is good grammar or it's not good grammar, it's also very fluid, like the creative process. Anyway.
Yeah, well, and I have a literature degree, and language is malleable. So even if it's not technically good grammar, like sometimes it can be in service of something else to write it in a different way.
Yeah. Yep.
Sorry, I was looking for something specific in here, and it is not. I'm not having the same sort
It's a
of
tough thing to do with that book unless you mark it up. Well, I mean, this book should be marked up and like have notes all over it and little, what do you call those little Post-it tabs?
Yeah. My little tabs. Like I said, I think I'm going to hand this over to somebody else, and I didn't want to have notes in it. So, but I absolutely intend to mark it up again. But yeah, I have my little.
Well, buy them a new one. Keep that one.
I find that like a lot of the things that we're talking about just right now, like, letting art, being a vessel for art and allowing it to come through you. Rick Rubin has spent a lot of time in the industry, and he is now in a position where that's something that he can do, and you can do whatever it is that you want. Mm-hmm. And I remember I hit a point in this book where I was like, this is a lot of advice that you can take if you have the freedom to do that already.
Yeah, I hear what you're getting at. Like in certain creative fields, it wouldn't necessarily be possible. Like, especially if you are the one executing somebody else's vision, like that, you would have to do it the way they want. There are places where you, as the professional and the creative, can step in and be like, hey, I think we might want to consider doing it this way instead, because that might be better in the long run. But, as a, designer by trade, sometimes I'll give that feedback and the client still wants what they want. And ultimately they're the one paying me, so I have to do it the way they want.
It does fall into the category of just take what you need from the book, and that might not be the same thing every time, but it does have a sort of like calming presence, and it felt like it made me feel a little bad because I haven't been able to like create the art that I've been feeling inside me for a while now, because I've been so busy with the creative work that I have to do. So I'm putting my creative work into these projects for other people.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, there was a point when I was reading it where I was just like, it must be nice to have the freedom to allow yourself to be free, I guess.
Yeah, I feel that because I'm in a similar position. But also he does address later on, like, if you have to have a job to support your creative work, like, then that's, you just do that. Like, there's nothing wrong with that.
Which is what I was looking for. And unable to find, but it was something that I wanted to bring up because we are talking a lot about like the freedom aspects of it. And I absolutely want to bring up that sometimes you don't have the choice to be a vessel for the art that you feel. And that is also okay.
Yeah. Well, and it's because you can create the art that you feel around the work that you have to get done to live. That was actually a topic of discussion over the weekend, was how to incorporate that when the work that you have to do to live is so consuming.
Yeah.
So
I wanted to say a quick thing about what I know very little about this, but what little I know about. So Rick Rubin definitely is a big figure in the industry, and he actually at one point was running the biggest record label in the world for a while, which I just thought was a really interesting career choice. He's not doing that anymore. He was running Sony for a while, but in his early career, I got the sense that this was always kind of his MO, and he would just not get himself fired, but just sort of calmly decide in a mutual parting of ways. This is my feedback. Sounds like I'm not a good fit for this project, and he was okay with because I don't think there was some I think Run DMC didn't use him more than a few times. Beastie Boys didn't use him more than a couple times at the beginning. Right. And so he's very okay with the idea that I may not be the right producer for this project.
I've done that with photography. I've had people try to hire me for very specific things, like events that aren't performances, and especially weddings. I've had friends of friends be like, "Hey, can you come shoot my wedding?" And no. That is a very specific thing that I do not have the tools for, and I am not in a place where I would like to attempt that. It's not my jam. So I've made a list of people that do kind of the same work as me, but adjacent, so that I can at least point them in the right direction. I think that's very important for creative professionals to do, and to know that they can do, because it does hit a point where you're just like, oh, I need this money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The power of no. And in fact, that Adele quote that I mentioned, I'm only 80% certain about this. Number one, I think I heard it from her and not him. She brought it up, and I'm 99% certain he didn't work on the project after that. Right. So it's a great story. And he also just said, okay, I'm not the right guy.
And yeah, sometimes you're just not the right person for the job. But also it's important to know when you are the right person for the job. This is an interesting book to discuss because it goes all over the place. You can take the words in this book any way you want for any discussion of the creative process. But I also want to talk about the fact that it's not the creative act alone. It is the creative act, a way of being. Because if I just open this up to pages, a lot of it goes back to what we were talking about at the very start of this, of, you don't have to be an artist to be creative. Being creative, and a lot of the points in this book are applicable to anybody. Just seeing past the ordinary and mundane, and being able to pull ideas together, and being just authentic to yourself, and knowing what you bring to the table are not creative,
it's not advice limited to artists.
Yes. I think I was saying creative professionals, and then I forgot the word professional. But yeah, I do want to bring that up, despite the fact that I think most of the people that are watching this are people who are either in an artistic field or want to be in some form of the artistic field, or have artistic hobbies. So I'm going to try and be more specific in when I say artistic versus creative. Because yeah, I I worked in customer service for a very long time, and you have no idea how much creativity it takes to be customer service.
Yeah, social creativity. Yeah.
Yeah. Another member of our group has a full-time job as a programmer, and that also, for something that is like very analytical and is not thought about as, that's definitely not an artistic job, definitely is a creative job.
Yeah. I'm in sales. You have to be very creative.
Yeah. So there, it's definitely something that isn't limited towards people who have artistic endeavors.
Yeah. Yeah. I think this book is very accessible.
I think I will revisit this book like when I am stressed out, especially about like creative processes, because yeah, reading it is calming. It has a lot of pages. Well, I say it has a lot of pages. It's a 400-page book, but it reads extremely fast because a lot of these pages don't have a lot on them. Like,
Yeah, and the chapters are short.
the chapters are short. It's very easy to read. And you can just open it up and read a part of it, and it will be helpful.
Yeah. And as reading has become more difficult for me, I have gotten into the habit of listening to audiobooks, and the audiobook is highly recommended. It's
good.
It's
Yeah,
also,
awesome.
yeah, it's good. It's very calming and meditative. Like, I can see it being really beneficial, especially during like moments of creative stress where I'm feeling creatively frustrated, to just like put on a chapter of it and just listen for a while and zone out.
Yeah. Is it just his voice, or is there also audio?
It's just
Or
his voice,
sound?
except there's a bell tone when the chapter changes.
Oh, it's very zen.
Yes.
So on his podcast, you might like this. I think Malcolm Gladwell's the one doing it, not Rick. But they're doing these. They did an interview with Paul Simon that was kind of a podcast, kind of a book on, audio book, but it included music, both music Paul Simon had recorded over the course of his career and him demonstrating things. And I've been meaning to check that out, and you might like it. I'm pretty sure it's Malcolm Gladwell's interview with Paul Simon. And I'm pretty sure it's not a podcast because you have to pay for it, right? So I think it's being marketed as an audiobook, but it sounded like they were doing some creative things with that audiobook structure. I think it was also a short thing. It wasn't like a 400-page, whatever it was, if it was written down. But there was really interesting uses of audio and music in this sort of thing with Paul Simon. Anyway, that was a digression. Sorry.
No need to apologize.
I always appreciate your suggestions. Miguel is full of suggestions. I don't know how you have time to listen to so many podcasts and read all of these books. I'm jealous.
I don't listen to that many. I just like I listen to good podcasts and I read good books, and I want to talk about them.
Me too. That's why I started these clubs. Well, actually, I don't do podcasts very much, but I listen to a lot of music and I watch a lot of movies.
Yeah.
I do a lot of podcasts, but I do more true crime podcasts than anything.
I would, one of the things I hadn't thought about before, and I think this is something Rebecca brought up, was that this is, if somebody wanted to be more of a creative person in their, let's say they're not an artist, this I think could be a really cool book for them. I don't know if somebody like that would reach out to this, but the way of being part of it is really true, and it's, I think, relevant to anybody who creates. And it could be there for accountants. It could be there for people who write code. It could be there for people, who are in sales that don't consider themselves artists, and more than that, don't consider themselves creative. Because I don't think anybody in any of those fields would like read through this and go, "This, I have no idea what he's talking about. This means nothing to me." I think it's relevant to a whole lot of people.
I was just thinking about this as you were saying it, because I have spent a lot of this call just being like the difference between like an artistic career and being creative. And I know a lot of people, including myself, who do jobs that are considered like in the artistic field that don't feel like they are that.
Yeah, there's that as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably more of that than the other way around. But anyway.
Yeah. So it's interesting because I did think a lot in this book about my job. I edit photos. And it's something that sounds like it's just like, oh, this is an incredibly creative and artistic job. And it's not. I take photos of like products and then I make them look good. And it's a very analytical and systematic process. But I still have to be creative in it, because sometimes you have to get around something and you have to find the solution. So yeah, definitely not a book that's just for people who are in artistic careers.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and what even is an artistic career? Because like a lot of people consider stuff like that, or like technical animators or things like that. Like that is a field in the arts.
Yeah.
But it is very technical in the way that it must be produced. So it's like, I don't know. I think the lines are more blurry than we attribute them.
Yeah, I think about my husband, who is a cameraman, but most of his job is like making sure things are in focus as like first AC. And like he does very little of the creative process, but he looks at things and he knows how to make them look good.
Yeah.
And it's not
that
so
in itself
much
is a creative process.
Yeah, it's a creative process, but it's something that like my dad, who is like a linguist, thinks it's the coolest thing ever. We're the artistic people, but neither of us have jobs that are in and of themselves like something that we would consider our artistic hobbies or that sort of thing.
Yeah, and that a lot of times that is necessary to, execute. Just like he says, I forget, it's later in the book, like towards the end, where he's talking about needing a job in order to execute the the art part of it. So like as a creative, like you may have some kind of day job or creative job that's not necessarily your quote unquote art that sustains you, but in furtherance of your broader goals as an artist, which, it's a common experience.
Yeah.
It makes me think of like during the SAG strikes when people were like, wow, there are so many actors. And it's like, well, yeah, because a lot of them aren't the big A-list celebrities. Like they need, that acting is a job for them, and they may have other jobs just to afford to live, but they're still requiring of, they're still, they're still, worthy of being paid fairly for the work that they do. So
yeah, I we did a series a little bit back of we were just making technical videos, but we still had to hire actors for that.
Mm-hmm.
So like there are videos that aren't leaving like a sales floor, but we still had to have actors.
Yeah, well, and there are a lot of like inside industry like training videos and things like that you wouldn't think that actors have to do those jobs. Like somebody has to do it. So.
Yeah, John Cleese from Monty Python had a series of management courses that were just taught to people in management, and they were really, really funny examples of what to not to do, right? And
I want to watch that.
I think I've seen him on occasion on YouTube, but it literally, and it's just him. It's not the whole Monty Python group, but he'll take something that managers do that's really negative and make it super funny. And then, and here's an alternative approach to that where it's not so negative, right? And that was super creative, but this would have been back, might go back as far as the 80s. It for sure was around in the 90s. And, nobody had that outside of the sphere of people who do training videos for corporations, right? And it might have been the 80s because I think it was like even pre-video store days, but neither here nor there.
That was the time frame where you could be fun with those, where I think about like all the fast food chains that had raps as their training videos.
You mean like people rapping the music for them?
Yep.
Not like rap the sandwich. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, there you go.
I'm interested in how to do. I would 100% watch a training video where it's just somebody like making a burrito the entire time, and probably be more invested than if it was just somebody talking to me.
If it's in rap form. Yeah, sure.
We're coming up on time. We have to land the plane.
Well, I think that for a book like this, it's something that will get brought up a lot on our Saturday calls. So I do want to ask, do you guys have any like final thoughts before we end this? We were just talking about sandwiches and I am very hungry. So
I'm hungry too. I'm thinking about cooking right now. I have a fun fact to share. I worked on a commercial with John Cleese.
There you go. Was he nice to work with?
Yeah, he was fine.
Mm-hmm. A commercial with John. He's super tall, isn't he? Like 6'6", 6'7"?
Yes, very tall.
Big dude.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, I don't remember what it was for, but everything was oversized. So they had this giant fake lobster that was like his dinner, and it was huge. But next to him, it didn't look that big because he's very big.
Wow. So there you go.
There you go.
I like that. I mean, I would just, my thing will be just, this is a great reference book to go back to again and again.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a lot of people that I think I would recommend it to, not because I think that it's eye-opening in any regard to like, the creative process, but just because it's a very calm way to remind you about things.
Yeah, well, and a lot of this, like I said in the beginning, is common sense, but it's not necessarily something that you like consider a lot. So it's good, like you said, to be reminded. And I can see myself going back to this one a lot.
Yeah. And it's been written by somebody who's done this for decades, right? It's clear none of this came up, while he was writing. This is just
none of it is new information.
It's funny because we spent a lot of time on this call talking about like artistic like jobs and things like that, and how like the technical making art kind of thing for somebody else, like doing something artistic but for a different process that's not necessarily your own art. That's Rick Rubin's entire career.
Yeah.
Yep.
So this was a wonderful book to read. I did listen to part of it as an audiobook, and I would also agree that the audiobook is fantastic.
Yeah. I listened to much more of the audiobook than I did read the book, but both have merit. Yeah.
So I would
have a really
highly
quick
recommend.
Rick Rubin factoid. People forget that the Beastie Boys' first big gig was opening for Madonna, which was a really, really not effective pairing of two different people's, audiences, because Madonna was still in the 14-year-old screaming girl phase, and Rick was their DJ, right? Huh. And they played off the fact that the girls just hated them, right? and Rick is on stage DJing, and then the rest of the Beastie Boys are just playing off of the fact that it's a bunch of 14-year-old girls and they hate them. And it didn't last very long. I think they only did a few dates, but I just think that's so funny.
Yeah, that's an odd pairing.
Yeah, it didn't last long, but they made the most of it. They were saying, "Oh, you don't like us? Watch this." You
Might as well. Yeah.
thought that was terrible? Watch that.
All right. So
Thank you,
I am
Rebecca.
going to end the call, but it was wonderful talking to you about this book. I can't wait to talk to you about it more because, like I said, I think it's something we're going to keep bringing up.
Yeah.
Yeah, just looks like Atomic Habits. Yeah.
Our next book club pick is going to be a fiction book that was released after the year 2000. I'm looking forward to reading it with you all, and we'll announce it on the 1st.
All righty. Thanks for tuning in.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.